All right, so today we are looking at section 2.1, which is our first section where we are actually trying to take data and do something with it. So we've briefly introduced Statcrunch for creating a simple random sample. However, that's not really organizing data that we've collected. It's just choosing individuals to get data from. So today we're looking at how we can use Statcrunch to organize qualitative data. So remember that qualitative data is when we are looking at data that's describing categories, and it can be numerical. It often is not. It can be, but remember that numerical qualitative data is really just an identifier. So the different types of organizers that we're going to look at, first is a frequency distribution, which what that does is lists each category that we have of data and the number of occurrences or individuals for each category. So your categories, let's say we're trying to display data about eye color. So the various eye colors would be listed, and then how many of each of those eye colors occurred would also be listed for every single category. So we have frequency distributions. So frequency distributions are really just counts. Like we're finding out how many of each. A relative frequency distribution is different. So you can see that it's important that you read carefully in the directions, because if it says frequency distribution, that's asking you to do something different than if it's asking you to do a relative frequency distribution. So relative frequency in general is the proportion or percentage of observations within a category. So meaning how much of the total does that particular category represent? So we could still make a relative frequency distribution about eye color, but instead of just listing how many people we had of each eye color, it would be the percentage of the total. So maybe, 15% of the people had green eyes, or 0.15. So proportion we will typically describe with decimals, could be fractions as well. Sometimes they write the relative frequencies with percents. And if it doesn't specify, then you can choose. So a relative frequency distribution, same as a frequency distribution, except instead of the counts, it's going to give us the proportions or percentages. I think that you've all seen a bar graph, but by definition, a bar graph is where we have each category of data labeled. It could be that the categories are on the horizontal axis. That's how I usually make bar graphs, but they're allowed to be on the vertical axis. And either the frequency or the relative frequency is on the other axis. So a frequency distribution or a relative frequency distribution is just like a table. We're just listing the counts. We're listing the percent. We're listing the proportion. On a bar graph, it's in picture form. So we're actually making a bar to show the count or to show the percentage. So we draw those lovely little rectangles. It is important here we put this modifier. You need on a bar graph for your rectangles to be the same width. You shouldn't have the rectangle that's representing blue eyes, be thicker than the rectangle that's representing brown eyes, for instance. So you should use rectangles of equal width. I'm not getting out a ruler or anything, but just try to make them equally spaced as you can. Obviously, when we're using Statcrunch, it's automatically going to do that for us. So rectangles of equal width are drawn for each category, and the height represents the frequency or relative frequency. So a Pareto chart is one that people usually don't know before they take this course. A Pareto chart is just a specific type of bar graph where the bars are drawn in descending order. So the highest frequency or relative frequency is first, then the second highest, all the way down to the lowest. So essentially the bars go from high to low. Pie chart, I know you have seen those as well. That's when we divide a circle into sectors. Each sector represents a category of the data, and the area of the sector is proportional to the frequency of each category. So pie charts, we're using percentages. We know that on relative frequency distributions, we're also using percentages. So on both of those, it's really important that the total be 1 or 100%, just depending on whether we're using fractions, decimals, or percentages. If we're using fractions or decimals, the total should be 1. If we're using percentages, then the total should be 100%. So all of the remaining notes here for today are directions for Statcrunch. These can be found in your text as well, usually at the end of the reading, the end of the examples of each section. They give you these directions. So you decide which set of directions you need based on what you're being asked to create and from what type of data. So we have frequency or relative frequency from raw data. That means I just actually have all the answers. Like, if I'm going back to that eye color example I've been using this whole time, I've got basically a list that says blue, brown, green, blue, blue, brown, brown, so on and so forth. That's what raw data looks like. So anything that says from raw data, that means that it's not already organized. So you can see we've got directions for frequency and relative frequency, bar graphs, and pie charts if the data is raw. If the data is already summarized, then the process that we use in Statcrunch is different. So you can see we've got bar graphs, pie charts, side-by-side bar graphs. That would be if you are asked for two different sets of data to make a side-by-side, because then, we can easily visually compare the two. And when I look at these, notice that I do not have frequency or relative frequency from summarized data. If the data is already summarized, then you will need to just do a frequency or relative frequency chart by hand, because they've already given you, the information you need. So Statcrunch doesn't need to organize it for us. So I'm going to show you by walking through this example at the bottom of the page how to construct all these various types of data using Statcrunch. So the question I always get is, well, what should I do about the homework? So you have two choices with the homework because they are graphs. It is obviously quicker to have Statcrunch do it for you in most cases. So when you go to turn it in, you will either need to print from your Statcrunch, or you can use a Google Doc and take screenshots from Statcrunch and then either print it or share it with me. Or third choice is to draw them all by hand. I suggest using Statcrunch and either doing the screenshots of the graphs that you need or printing them to attach to your physical papers. But if you're, have gotten to the night before homework is due and your Statcrunch is down, then you've got no other choice but to do it by hand. So that is an option. It's just not the one that I would choose. So I am going to switch over now. So you should have this paper in front of you to glance at while I am kind of going through what's on here. So I've shown you the data that's provided for this example. And it says the following data represent the day of the week an order was placed for groceries using the online grocery delivery service Instacart. So it asks us to do several things. The first is that it asks us to construct a frequency and relative frequency distribution. So this is raw data. So I am going to be able to use my Statcrunch steps here. So give me a second to switch over to a different screen. All right, so in Canvas, when you are on the landing page for the course, remember that to get to Statcrunch, you're going to click on Modules, and then down here, click on Statcrunch. You may have to physically sign in. So up in the corner, right-hand corner, it will say sign in or register if you're not logged in. If you are logged in, it will say your username up there. And then this will be able to be clicked, whereas you won't be able to click it if you're not signed in. So I'm going to open Statcrunch. In the first set of notes where we talked about Statcrunch, one of the things that I showed you how to do was how to upload data from the web. So I am going to be adding to the modules because it appears that at least for the time being, your access, I'm going to show you the links I'm going to use so that hopefully eventually that will work for you. But currently you can't actually click on everything you need to be able to click on. So I'm going to create a new module in Canvas where I have cut and pasted the links for you, so that hopefully that will work. So this problem is actually from number 23 in the text, which is not one I assigned to you since we're using it as an example. But when I go to upload this data, now of course you could just type it in if you wanted, but that would take forever. So I'm going to go to data load from file on the web. And when I do that, it takes me here where I can actually paste the web address. Now, once you've actually gotten all the access that you need, for right now, if you scroll down in modules to data sets, I am going to add a little thing here that says direct links is what it's going to be called. because right now when you do what I'm about to do, it won't work for you because the district has blocked one of the sites. So when I click on data from textbook, I believe you guys can see this. It's when you go to click the next link that it doesn't work. So right now we're in chapter 2 because we're in section 2.1. And here are all the links that we would need. But again, for some reason, they have this page blocked for you. So I'm going to copy and paste all these links. I'm not going to sort them. So they're going to be links that you don't need because I didn't assign those problems in the homework. You just need to find the ones that I did. So the way that it works is this says, here's the data for chapter 2. This is section 1. So that means 2.1. As I said, this example that's in the notes is from number 23. So all I'm doing is I'm copying this link, and then I go over to my Statcrunch where it says web address, and I paste the link. Data set name, I'm going to do 2.1 notes example is what I'm calling it. You don't need a description. You can leave that blank. You want to just leave these parts as is. There are optional properties. I've never needed them. So really that's all you should have to do, and then click upload. Once you have done that, you can see that it has taken all of that data for days of the week and it has put it into a column for me labeled day. So all my data is in there. I didn't have to type it. It's nicely organized. So now that I have the data, I can walk through the steps on these notes to create what I need to create. So under these steps for Statcrunch frequency or relative frequency distributions from raw data, so top left Statcrunch directions, says step 1, if necessary, enter the raw data into the spreadsheet and name the column. That's already done for us. Step 2, select stat. So that's right here. Then it says highlight tables. So tables are right here. And I'm going to choose or select frequency. Now, when you get in here, you actually have to, even though there's only one column here, you still have to select it. And it says, click on the variable you wish to summarize. So in this data, we only had one variable, which was day of the week. But we might have collected all kinds of different data from people, for instance. Maybe we have a variable for height, for weight, for eye color, for hair color. So you select the variables that you actually care about in this moment. So right now we only have one choice, but I do need to click on it. It'll bring it over to this side when I do that. Then I need to click the type of table that I want. If you want both frequency and relative frequency, click the first one, and then it's like either a shift click or a control click, just depending on which one works on your Chromebook or computer. So right down here, I'm going to click on frequency. It highlights it. And then I am going to click on relative frequency as well. So that allows me to actually do both simultaneously, which is super convenient. There are different, all kinds of other options that in this case I do not need. And when we get to the point where we're needing them, I'll show you how to use those. But for right now, all we need to do is click compute, and it will, notice that I can drag this, but it gives you a little box. This is both my frequency and relative frequency chart. So if you were doing this by hand, you would do the same thing. You would list the days of the week because those are the categories, and then you would list the count of how many for each of those categories. That's the frequency. Relative frequency is the proportion. So the way they got these numbers is dividing by the total. Notice that Statcrunch is super nice, and right up here, I know it's hard to read because the typing's small, but that says count equals 42, which means they're telling you that's the total. So you don't have to go through and count how many pieces of data there are. Statcrunch did that for you. So the way we got this decimal is by doing 8 divided by 42. If you are like Mrs. Thomas, I would much rather write that out by hand than pull a screenshot into Google Docs or print it or whatever. Again, totally fine with me. Yes, you may round those decimals. You don't have to carry all those decimal places if you are doing it by hand. Many of them will tell you what to round to. If it doesn't, carry at least 2 decimal places. So like maybe 0.19, 0.12, 0.17, so on and so forth. Do keep in mind that if you are rounding your values, that the total may be slightly off from 1 as a result. But that's just due to rounding, not necessarily due to your error. All right, so this is part A. So if I'm doing this for homework, I would screenshot this. I would pull it into a Google Doc, which I then would either share or print for my instructor. Now, part B is just a real question. And again, you can either write these out on your own paper, or if you prefer to type to have it all in one place, you can do that as well. It says, if you own an Instacart franchise, what day would you want to have the most drivers available to deliver groceries? Obviously, you want to have the most drivers available on the day where the most people are ordering. So I look at my frequency and I'm looking for the highest count, which in this case, it's close. But Saturday has the highest count, closely followed by Sunday. So our answer to part B would be Saturday. Part C asks me to construct a relative frequency bar graph. So bar graph from raw data is what I am now going to follow the steps for. And again, I can't show you every single thing, but I have given you the directions for every single thing. So if you follow the steps, it really is super user-friendly. So bar graphs from raw data, if you look at your notes, the steps there, again, step 1 is already done. We've already got the raw data in there. So for a bar graph, it says select graph. So that's this guy. And then it says highlight bar plot. So that would be this. I am going to select with data. So if the data were already summarized, then I would click with summary. And the steps for that tell you that. But in this case, I'm just going to choose with data. Very similarly, which is why this program is so user-friendly, is that it looks very similar when I do the various things. I need to select my column. So I've select day. The directions say click on the column name of the variable you want to summarize. Leave the grouping option as split bars. Okay? Then it says choose the type of bar graph, frequency or relative frequency. So my directions in this case asked me for a relative frequency. So I need to choose that one. So unfortunately, you can't do both of these at once. You will need to do one at a time if it asks you to do both. So I've chosen relative frequency. And then I do need to, because this is a type of graph, I do need to type, and it tells you on the directions, the labels for the X and Y axis, as well as a title for the graph. So for my X-axis label, I am going to say that this is day of delivery. And for Y-axis, I'm just going to label it relative frequency. For the title, I'm going to just put Instacart delivery day. Once I have done that, I can click compute, and it always defaults to putting it over on the side, but you can drag it wherever. And this is nice because if you are printing, you can kind of put them all in the same place and then just print it once. It's not like you have to print the screen 6 different times. You can, adjust them. You can change the size to make them fit. But here you can see it does it for me. I've got my title, I've got the days, and then these are the relative frequencies. Notice that it doesn't go up to 1 because I don't have any relative frequencies that are much bigger than that 0.2. If we look over here, Saturday 0.21 was the biggest one. If we were writing these as percentages, then obviously this one would be 5%, 10%, 15%, 20% for our totals. So there we've got part C done. We have a relative frequency bar graph. Now we're going to construct a pie chart. So pie chart from raw data. Steps. First step is to enter the data. We've already got that. Then I'm going to go back to the same place. I'm going to make this smaller and get it out of the way a little bit. Put it over here. So go to graph again, and right here is pie chart. Again, right now I have raw data. If I already had the summary, I would choose that and I would look at those instructions on my notes. So pie chart with data. Again, click on the column you want to summarize, and then you want to click on what you want to display. So typically with pie charts, we do it by percentage and not by count. But if it were to tell you to do it by count, then you could select that. But our default is going to be % of total unless it tells you otherwise. And then we have to enter a title. So again, I'm going to use the same title I did before, Instacart delivery days, and click compute. Notice that it not only gives me the very pretty color-coded values in my pie chart, but it gives me the percentages over on the right side. If we had chosen count, it would give us the individual frequencies of each. All right, so hopefully this helps you figure out how to navigate in Statcrunch. Certainly we will answer questions that you have on the homework. But hopefully this gives you a good start. Again, you are allowed to do them by hand if you would like, but it's quicker in most cases to use your Statcrunch resource.